that will bring in a paradigm shift in the educational systems and creation of employment in India and abroad. The budget earmarked 99,300 crore rupees for the education sector in 2020-21 and about 3,000 crore rupees for skill development. In the previous union budget, the government's allocation for the sector was 94,800 crore rupees. The FM said about 150 higher educational institutions will start apprenticeship embedded degree or diploma courses by March 2021 and will start a program whereby urban local bodies across the country would provide internship opportunities to fresh engineers for a period of up to 1 year. To create infrastructure in education sector, steps would be taken to enable sourcing external commercial borrowings and FDI so as to be able to deliver higher quality of education. Institutions that are ranked within the top 100 in the National Institutional Ranking Framework will start degree-level full-fledged online education programs for students of deprived section of the society. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze the best way forward for education in India. Joining me on the program today are Anita Rampal, Professor, Department of Education, University of Delhi; Sushil Chandra Tripathi, former Secretary, Ministry of HRD, Government of India; and Aditi Tandon, Special Correspondent of the Tribune. Thank you, my guests, for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Professor, let me begin the program with you. Almost 1 lakh crore rupees has been put aside as far as the education sector is concerned, 3,000 crore rupees for skill development. This is something that we've spoken about over the years, about how our youngsters need to be skilled as well as the world changes. Happy with the allocation? Do you think that, the emphasis on skilling is something that is desired and something that's good?
No, I wouldn't say I'm happy, because the needs of our system, both higher education and school education, have not been met. In fact, on the one hand, when we have to look at these things with other things, we have to look at these things with the education policy draft and also the inequality report, which is telling us what's happening. So what are the younger people going to aspire for? What kind of a future? And is the education budget, or rather the education agenda, going to bridge inequalities when it understands what quality is? Or is it going to segregate and then, say that, well, people can fend for themselves, some fend with skilling and the other fend with knowledge and academic courses? So it is a worry. I mean, school education, even though there are indications that, the policy said that we're going to extend the Right to Education Act from age 3 to 18. It doesn't look like it's happening, because even right now, there are just about 12% of our schools which are RTE compliant. So where do we make up and compensate for that, when even the existing schools are not, for 6 to 14 age group? And what is more worrying is that what the Niti Aayog report on school education quality had shown, there is a deliberate attempt to try and underplay inputs. And there's only talking about outcomes, learning outcomes, which don't come through the air, but which need a learning environment, which need teachers. We are short of teachers, and we don't find that even in the budget nor in the policy, a thrust of trying to say that we don't have almost half the number of teachers, whether in universities or even in schools. Where do they come from? How does good teacher education happen? And we cannot leave that to the private sector, because right now we know, and Justice Varma Commission had told us, that the large sector of teacher education is in private hands, which is substandard. That's what it says, that almost 95% and more is not really good standard. So where does that happen? So just by saying this and saying we'll do online higher education, I don't think the young sort of aspiring India is going to be happy about such a situation, because as more and more people come in, and especially from first generation learners or deprived homes, you need much more face-to-face engaging and peer learning. Learning just doesn't happen from, on a one-to-one basis. You learn what are our universities known for, because we provide an environment where there's a lot of thinking, engagement, working together, and then people, their mindsets and their learning exposure changes. You can't do this online. So just by saying that everything can be digitized, whether it's higher education or school education, because the policy is saying that, we'll now allow online assessments, we'll do National Open School, even at grade 3 and grade 5. That is completely shocking, if I can say. So I think it's very clear that we are on that bend when we are trying to say that no, everyone doesn't really need good inputs, good quality, and that we can segregate some to go in for skilling much earlier and others who can pay for their education.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Tripathi, let me bring you to the picture then. So, Professor Rampal has raised a few issues really as far as the education sector is concerned. She doesn't think that online education is a good idea. What then is the answer? Because population seems to be burgeoning day by day. You know, people need to be educated. We need to have a widespread kind of an education system so as to ensure everyone is taken along. So how do we do that?
I'll come to that a little later, but let me first take up the gap that was existing in Indian system between education and knowledge and skill. So that gap has to be filled, because education did not necessarily mean having knowledge, and knowledge did not necessarily mean having skills. Therefore, we have been producing large number of educated unemployable people. So I think the direction, therefore, one cannot quarrel very much. The details, of course, one has to look at. Now, the basic education is what government has to really focus and ensure right to education is complied with and successfully implemented. I think Professor Rampal also mentioned about the basic education aspect, and I do agree with her that that is where the government focus has to be maximum, and that there should not be any compromise. The secondary education has to be linked with life skills. Therefore, vocationalization has to be brought into mainstream, whether it is through CBSE or other boards. Because all over the world, you see, after secondary education, most people join the job market. But in India, unfortunately, people remain unemployable. And higher education, again, there is a realization which is coming in the government that government perhaps cannot fund the entire budget, entire requirement of higher education. Therefore, they are asking for ECB, foreign investment, foreign universities, etc., etc. Now, higher education all over the world, about 25-30% people in that age, 18 to 24, go into higher education. So, the quality also in the government institutions of higher education has not been up to the mark. But I have some issues regarding what the government is saying in the budget and also in the new education policy. They are saying that you go for external commercial borrowing and you go for foreign direct investment, which means so far higher education as well as secondary education was permitted by the regulators to be taken up only on a non-profit basis. How can there be foreign direct investment and ECB if it remains a non-profit? So therefore, it's a very major change. It becomes commercialization of higher education, for which I don't know if we are all ready to accept in a major way. It has taken place in very subtle manner through private institutions, and therefore you see a university like MIT having 50 to 100 programs of graduate and postgraduate level, and students paying 2 lakh rupees a year, whereas in the universities like Allahabad and Lucknow, they don't even pay 200 rupees, and there are only a very few programs. So therefore, a commercialization is taking place in higher education, because higher education again has to be linked to the requirements of industry, requirements of the society. So there are these directions, but I'm not sure if firstly the teacher body and also the general public, we are ready for such kind of changes. Now, coming to online education, I agree that online education should be very selective and given only to very few universities, very few institutions for a very few programs, because our experience in the past has been that it has been like selling degrees, and people take online education just to get degree, and thereafter with the degree then they try by hook or by crook to get jobs on the basis of that degree. So online education, I will again say, it should be restricted to very few programs for a few universities and not taken up in a very big way like that, unless we have prepared the infrastructure and we have The follow-up also on online with contact basis, where teachers come and they take assessments of the students who are taking online, which unfortunately in most places here has not been happening.
Right. All right. Aditi Tandon, you've been listening into both the panelists very patiently. Let's take this discussion forward. Now, the issue of FDI in education. All right. So, on one hand, you want to change the system. You want to ensure that you have better institutions, better universities, world-class universities like you have abroad. On the other hand, you want to continue to give some kind of a, a subsidy, some kind of a subsidized rates. So, these two things don't match at some level. How do we ensure that both can go hand in hand?
Well, as far as I can see the direction of the union budget, the finance minister made it amply clear that we need to attract finances into the education system. The biggest challenge for the system has been funding, Frank. And if you look at the education budgets over time, you also see that majority of the education budget is reserved for the school education. For instance, if you see the 99,300 crore bracket, out of that around 59,000 crore is for school education, and majority of that is for the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan, which is really meant to fund the right to education objectives, which Professor Rampal just now said have not been met adequately, despite the fact that the law was passed way back in 2010. So, those challenges remain at the school education front. Now, you are coming at the higher education front, where you see what is now happening is the government is saying that we don't have enough money to sustain or to fund and source higher education avenues for all the students, because a large number of students, the gross enrollment ratio is also, improving day by day. Enrollments at school level are improving. But as far as I'm concerned, the biggest challenge, Frank, remains primary education in the country. The fact remains that learning and innovation indices in our schools remain very low. Even if you look at the Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan funding, you will realize that only around 9% of the total Sarv Shiksha Abhiyan component for the school education up to the elementary level goes towards, inculcating that habit of innovation among Indian students. If you look at government schools, you will find literally barren laboratories. For instance, science laboratories, the infrastructure is lacking. So it's not as though the Indian students, for instance, staying in some faraway remote corner of a village doesn't have that innovation aptitude in him or her. But does the school infrastructure capitalize on that innovative skill in the student? So you have to first lay the foundation that is strong. The education policy can only then serve the required purpose when you have the school education directed in a way that it encourages learning as well as innovation among all our students. Then you come to the higher education sector. What the government is now doing is, through external commercial borrowings and through the FDI route, what they are essentially saying is they are not allowing foreign universities to set up independent standalone campuses in India. But what they are essentially saying is they are drafting a scheme, the HRD ministry is drafting a scheme which will allow a foreign university to partner with an Indian higher educational institution to set up a system or a campus in India. So you see, you already have a lot of private universities in India right now which have foreign collaborations. Mr. Tripathi was mentioning a certain university which does have some kind of foreign collaboration, and commercialization of education is the hard truth, Frank. I mean, we have to look it in the eye. We can't, there's no going back, right? The government doesn't have enough funding to finance the entire education sector. And by 2030, India is going to have the highest working age population anywhere in the globe. So there have to be parallel systems created to finance such a vast and comprehensive higher education system. But yes, checks and balances will have to be provided for within the ambit of the new education policy, which is going to define what legal structures would we require to allow foreign campuses to partner with Indian institution. Maybe is it a full-fledged campus collaboration or is it a course-based collaboration? Because you can also offer courses in collaboration with foreign partners. And a very valid question that Mr. Tripathi was raising is whether this will be a for-profit kind of a system. Now, you see, the Companies Act does provide for a lot of such avenues, but you have to clarify. So, the HRD ministry in the new scheme would have to clarify all these objectives.
Right.
As far as the online degree courses are concerned, the government has put in one check and balance by saying that we will not allow all institutions to offer online degree courses. Only those institutions which are among the top 10 in the national institutional rankings will be allowed to offer online courses. And as far as I know, a lot of students now are leveraging technology for education and knowledge gathering. So I don't see any major problem with that.
Okay, all right, taking the discussion forward. Now let's go back to a point that was being made earlier. A large number of unemployable graduates are being produced by India is what Mr. Tripathi was suggesting. So how do we sort that problem out, Professor Rampal? Because these people need jobs at the end of the day.
Sure, but if we improve the education system, the mode in which education is conducted, not just by giving some notes or lectures and expecting people to memorize information and take exams, our exams continue to be quite meaningless. So if we improve the education system, which is based on case studies, on projects, on doing things yourself, on surveys, on questions of more critical input and hands-on learning, you don't need a separate skill process. It should be inbuilt in the courses we design.
So at what level should this start? At what age? At what grade? Is there a model that we can probably try and implement here in India?
I mean, the model has to be contextual. The Indian model for school education, which was Nai Talim, is something which is still very relevant, where it's work and education. It's everything hands-on, you work right from the beginning, everyone does it. It's not you select some and say only you need to do it for a vocation. So, not segregation on the basis of vocation, but work-based learning which starts right from the beginning and then becomes more specialized at higher secondary level, where you specialize in certain areas. But again, your education is not forgotten. Here what happens is, our skill courses are designed by industry, not by educationists. Whereas the other countries that we quote, we have seen their programs even at the higher level. They have a very good education, foundational education component along with even their vocational education courses. We don't have that. So I think this attempt to say that because they are unemployed, I mean, people will, it's not just the employment which matters, it's also the way you have done education, your mind, and you very rightly say innovation. There's a lot of jugaad in children who are not even in school, but as soon as you come into school, your curiosity, your jugaad, your innovation, your thinking skills, everything are stunted because you're going through a system without really being able to make sense of it and construct your own knowledge. You're just taking something from a book and doing a cut and paste. So that has to be really made meaningful, where observations and understandings and different viewpoints coming together, understanding, making your own understanding. That is, you do that right from the beginning. And then even at the college level, if you have courses which are doing that, as well as you're engaging with the field. You can do history and still do things in which you're engaging with the field. It doesn't have to be only a vocational course.
Okay, all right. So, Mr. Tripathi, then to ensure we have a holistic approach and to ensure that we have this kind of an education system, how important is it for the educators, for the academicians, and for all the others, for all stakeholders to come together and take the system along as a whole? It can't just be the government's prerogative.
Yeah. You see, we need structural reforms. I started my career as a teacher in university, Allahabad University. I taught for 4 years. And after ending my civil service career, I was for 9 years chairman of National Institute of Technology. We need structural reforms where, as Professor Rampal pointed out, the work-based practical learning is more important than just theoretical learning. And here, it should start with the primary level, but of course, intensify at secondary level. Secondary level is the most important level where vocationalization of education, whether you call it vocationalization or project-based or work-related, it has to become meaningful to life skills, and all these things have to be integrated. What has happened is, in India, we set up ITIs and polytechnics, but they were given to second class students. They were not mainstreamed. Unless you mainstream these things, people don't go and learn them. They think that they are for second class. Now, all over the world, whether you go to east or you go to west, very common observation. Every resident, he knows the basics of carpentry, electrician, smithy, everything. Therefore, for household matters, plumbing, etc., he doesn't go to a specialist every now and then, he does himself. In India, you have people who are masters of science, masters of technology, but they can't do these things themselves. So, therefore, the skills have to be developed. The skills will come at an early stage if vocationalization is mainstreamed at class 11 and 12 certainly, if not from 9 and 10. And a happy feature I see in the budget is that the universities will take up vocational programs or diploma programs. They are more important. You see, even in technical education, I tried to see that people who have real experience of running engineering industries, if they have master's degree, they should be invited. This is what happens all over the world. In Germany, in USA, in Japan, there is no dividing wall between academic and the practitioner. But here in India, there is a dividing wall, and our qualifications have become such that an academic cannot go to industry, and industry person cannot come in the classroom and teach. So these walls have to go away, and therefore, unless we do these structural reforms, it will be very difficult. Now, what we are doing is, instead of reforming AICTE and UGC, we have now opened a new system where we are setting up institutes of excellence and institutes of eminence, which are still on paper. So, reform the system. Structural reform should come within the system, and not, you don't superimpose other things on the existing system, you reform the system.
Okay.
That is, of course, easier said than done. And curriculum and teachers training are also very important. Now, I find that in most cases why the curriculums don't change is that the teachers are resistant to it. You see, it is human nature. They have been used to a certain curriculum and they were trained there. So when you change the curriculum, it becomes difficult to get teachers. So these things have to come. Of course, they will come slowly, but some beginning has to be made.
Okay, all right.
And I hope the new education policy brings it.
All right, Aditi, so since we're here, then what's the best way forward really as far as education in our country is concerned?
Well, I agree with the panelists who are saying that at the school level, perhaps starting with the 10th standard, you need to introduce an element of vocational education. And the government has been toying with that idea, with the CBSE actually experimenting with a few courses now, and some schools have started to offer some kind of vocational training. We are also learning from the experience of other countries. A lot of collaborations have happened. Our teams have gone abroad, learned about the vocational education qualification networks, and come back and try to implement these in our schools. But we are still far from there. Then, of course, at the higher education level, Frank, the problem with the education system remains that we are a highly degree education dominated sector. You know, most of the graduates that are coming out of our colleges, they are concentrating on degree education, you know, BA, BSc, these kind of degrees, which do not lend themselves to employment of any kind. Similarly, if you look at the premier schools, you have other kinds of talent being attracted to the top end schools like the Indian Institutes of Technology, and on the management side to the Indian Institutes of Management. But there are only so many available options in the engineering sector, and henceforth now we have a situation where a lot of trained engineers from a lot of AICTE approved colleges are unemployed. So I think the first starting point for any government before introducing any vocational element at school level or at higher education level is to first understand what is the requirement of the economy of India. Which are the sectors of Indian economy which are going to absorb maximum budgets in the coming years? One apparent sector is infrastructure. A lot of roads are being constructed. You know, you heard the finance minister give so much boost to the infrastructure development. She mentioned some 650 projects under the infrastructure development, because India is looking to become a $5 trillion economy very soon. For that you need a lot of grid, you know, network. So what kind of resources or skills would you require then to build that kind of infrastructure? Those are the skills that you need to create the jobs for. And those are the kind of skills that then you need to train your students for. For instance, automobile sector, for instance, the national highway sector, the civil, engineering sector.
Yeah.
These are the kind of, and then you have the earth, you have a lot of buildings now that require, norms that are environmentally friendly, norms that also live up to the, earthquake resistance standards.
Absolutely.
So you need a whole skill set around these sectors.
Sure.
So India should start researching and actually creating a database of what kind of resources or personnel that we are going